If you've ever wondered what it's like to live in the desert Southwest, today I'll share with you the 10 things to love and the 10 things to hate about living in the desert Southwest. I love living out in the desert Southwest. It's exciting, it's different, and it's very unique. But for some people, it may have extremes that are not really something they want to adapt to. So today I'm going to share with you the 10 things I absolutely love and the 10 things I could do without, and why they're important to knowing before you get here. So let's start with the love list. The first one is pretty obvious, and that's the abundance of sunshine. I'm not really sure how many days of sunshine we get a year, but it's well above 300 and probably closer to 320 or even 340. We don't have a lot of rain. We do have a monsoon season in the summer, and we do get some rain in December. We do get a couple of snow storms here or there, depending on where you live in the desert Southwest. It is possible to get snow. But you know what? It's mostly sunny. And when I say sunny, it's mostly 100% clear blue skies. In fact, I've seen little kids even marvel at the fact that there's clouds and that the sky is a little bit overcast. It actually is kind of fun to have an overcast day. And that's hard to believe coming from the Northeast, where we had so many overcast and rainy days all the time, or snowy days. It's really delightful to just have clear blue skies most of the time. Along with the sunshine comes the second point, and that is low humidity. Now, much of our country has high humidity, and if you've grown up in it and lived in it most of your life, you've become accustomed to it, but it is uncomfortable, and it adds a whole nother issue to summertime in particular. Here in the desert Southwest, we have very low humidity. And it's kind of funny when we have rainy season that a lot of the locals will say, you know, it's so humid outside. And for those of us that have grown up in other regions, it's not humid at all. But, you know, for the most part, we have a very low humidity. I can tell you when I first moved here, I was getting ready for a job interview and I spilled some water on my notes. And I thought, oh gosh, I really need these notes. So I laid them out outside and just put them down on the pavers and walked away, went in the house. And about 5 minutes later, they were flying away in the wind because they had dried that quickly. So I was just blown away by how quickly things dry. One of the things I love is that I don't always have to use the dryer. I can just hang the clothes out to dry and let them sun dry and wind dry outside in a very short period of time. It doesn't take long at all. So this is kind of a nice little perk, and then they smell so fresh and clean coming in from outside. Another thing I love about the desert Southwest is that there's fantastic day tripping. You can go to another state easily and see completely marvelous wonders of the world almost. You can see the Red Rocks, you can see Hoover Dam, you can see Santa Fe and Taos with the Southwestern architecture. It's just a marvelous things to see. And then, of course, if you go down to southern Arizona, you can see the saguaro cactus, which are unique to the state of Arizona. So lots to see, lots to do, lots of museums, and a lot of culture. A lot of culture that's different than other parts of the country. One of the things we're very proud of in the desert Southwest are our sunrises and our sunsets, particularly our sunsets. When are a few clouds in the sky, we get an orange sky or a red sky because all of the sun is reflecting up off the earth and reflecting back into the clouds, and it's mind-blowing. It's beautiful. We also have fantastic rainstorms that come in kind of like a spigot of water, and they just open up. There's crazy lightning storms that are very good to see from a distance, of course, but very interesting and very different than other parts of the country. There's a beauty to that as well, especially over a desert landscape. Another thing you notice right away when you come to the desert Southwest is just how many stars you can see in the sky. So this is point number 4. We have beautiful towns that limit the amount of light that they emit so that we can see the dark sky with the stars. And it's just completely a blanket of stars. It's amazing. It's fun to sit out in the starlight or the moonlight and just gaze up at the stars. What a relaxing way to end a day. The fifth thing, and a very important thing, is there's a lot of small towns out here, and they're very unique. There are many small towns that have retained their small town feel despite an influx of new people moving to many of the places in the desert Southwest. So if you enjoy kind of a small town welcoming environment, living in the desert Southwest can offer that. Now, of course, there are big cities like Albuquerque and Phoenix and other places. However, we do have many small towns, and even though there's been an influx of a lot of people from other states, we do still have that vibe, that small town vibe, where people will sort of tip their hat, even if they're not wearing a hat. One of the things people do is they nod when you go by or when you drive by, and say hello or wave to you as you're driving by in your neighborhood. So it's just really fun to be in a friendly small town environment. You may hear off in the background some birds. There's some blackbirds hawking out there. And so one of the things that is part and parcel of living in the desert is the wildlife. We can see roadrunners, we can see desert hares, which are very different than a rabbit, javelinas, we can see wildcats like bobcats and mountain lions. Thankfully, I have not seen those up close and personal. There are snakes, but there's beauty. There's beauty in the wildlife, the different kinds of birds. We have very, very different birds. And we have desert quail. All of these are different than other parts of the country. And so it just also adds to some of the beauty. The desert is beautiful. You know, that's a whole nother point. The desert is beautiful. A lot of times before moving here, I didn't necessarily think of the desert as beautiful. A lot of people think of the desert as being dry and brown. But there is a beauty and a peacefulness to the desert landscapes. And sometimes even in the desert Southwest, in the higher regions, you know, we have rolling hills with grasses and grasslands where cows can graze, and have a history of cowboys herding cattle all through history out here. It's just very diverse, and it can change in an hour's drive. You can see a completely different landscape. So that also makes it very interesting. The seventh thing on my list of 10 things to love about the desert Southwest is the slower pace. This is a very welcome change for me, and I'm sure for many other people. We just don't hurry, hurry, hurry. We don't rush. Of course, bigger cities will have traffic and traffic jams, but for the most part in the desert Southwest, there's wide open spaces and vast amounts of land, and there's an unhurriedness, a genteelness, a more welcoming vibe to the people, the landscape, and people are just used to moving slower out here. So that definitely is something to consider if you're looking for that. The eighth thing to love about the desert Southwest is that there are lots of free activities. Many of the towns have free activities where there are concerts all summer long, say once a month you can go, or even sometimes once a week. You can go to the town center and experience a concert, a bluegrass festival, an art craft show, all kinds of things that bring adventure in the smallest of ways, but offer some entertainment, offer a diversion, offer a day out, and it's free. It's free to the public, and people go, they get an ice cream cone or get a beer somewhere, come out and dance to the music. You'll see grandparents dancing, couples dancing, and little children dancing to the music. And that was one of the things that struck me when I first came looking out here, was that all age demographics are represented, and everyone's out having fun. They're not in their houses behind closed doors watching television as much. They take big advantage of the landscape, of the activities, of the weather. It all comes into just being more active and being outside more. And last but not least, a couple of things on my 10 list have to do with what I would call living in the Wild West. The first of those is the rodeo, and it's a big part of the culture out here. There's a cowboy culture where you will see people in cowboy boots and cowboy hats and cowboy belts, which is also a thing, out and about, living their daily lives and really just being themselves. You'll see cowboys out and about, and it almost feels like you're on a Hollywood set sometimes. It's really fun. The last couple of items on the list have to do with the fact that we are out in what would be considered, to me at least, still the Wild West. Why is it the Wild West? Well, you know, there's not outlaws necessarily out here like in the olden days, But there are things like the rodeo where the cowboys showcase their skills at the end of the year. The rodeos are going on all year long. There are towns where they're doing roping every single day in the cooler months. And so it really, really is exciting to be out and see these events, as well as just the day-to-day with people generally wearing cowboy boots and cowboy hats, both men and women and little kids. I think those are remnants of the Wild West days and the cowboy days. So it's kind of just a nice little piece of culture out here. And hand in hand with that is the ranching vibe. You know, many of these regions have had ranching as a primary form of commerce. So there's many, many cattle farms out in the West, and you see beautiful landscapes. There's drives you can take just along the side of the mountain and the foothills there where the cattle roam, as well as pronghorn antelope and other wonderful wildlife. And the last big surprise of living out in the desert Southwest is a lot of these states were mining states. And so there are mines that are still active, mining turquoise and copper and silver, but also you can actually pan for gold. And this was really a big surprise for me. And it kind of ties into that Wild West kind of vibe, that actually people can pan for gold and actually find gold. It's not a tourist trap where you're paying to pan for gold. You actually gear up, go out into the streams or the lakes, and you pan for gold. And you could actually find something, which is kind of amazing to me in this day and age, that you could pan for gold and actually still find gold in them thar hills. So just a fun little perk of living out here and being in the desert Southwest. And last but not least, and this would be an extra on my list of 10, would be that we have a great arts culture. We have galleries and musicians and silversmiths and wonderful, wonderful things to stroll through and see. We have art walks where you can walk around on a certain given day of the month and go store to store and really just enjoy the arts that change. We have co-ops all over the place where the artists can show their wares. And it's beautiful and it's interesting and unique to this part of the country. So now let's transition into the 10 things to hate about the desert Southwest. So the first thing at the top of the list to hate about the desert Southwest, and I think this would be true for almost everyone, are the poisonous snakes. Now we do have poisonous snakes and they live here and this is their home before it was our home. But the great thing about that is that they do hibernate in the winter. It does get cold in the winter. A lot of people just don't realize that. But the temperatures do dip between 30 degrees from the high of the day to the low of the day. And so in the winter, it can get particularly cold. Well, that opens up the window to not run across snakes between, let's say, October and April or October and May. So you can do all the activities, hiking and go out into the mountains and everything without any worry during those months. I particularly do that, but many people don't stop in the summer just because of the snakes. You just have to have an awareness because they're not really interested in the humans unless you come too close to them or threaten them, then they will strike. So for the most part, unless you have an accident and step on one or get very, very close to one, you're not going to have a run-in with them. It is important to keep your dogs away from the snakes, and there are dog trainings, and there are actually even vaccines for the dogs to the anti-venom. So this will help with your animals. But for the most part, they're a non-issue. I think I've only seen a few snakes since I've lived here, and that's a rarity. You don't really see them on the day-to-day. So you can kind of put that to the side a little bit. It's just an awareness that you have to have. I was told that when you step outside of your home, you should look before you put your foot down because they could be curled up or coiled up right outside your front door or your garage door. I've never had that happen either, but it is a good awareness to have, and it's definitely a safety tip worth mentioning. The other thing to hate about the desert Southwest is it gets hot, and it gets extremely hot, depending on the altitude of where you live. Now, if you're low-lying, let's say Albuquerque, Phoenix, Tucson, you're going to get extreme temperatures. But if you're tucked in against some foothills, it can be alleviated by as much as 3 to 5 degrees. So you really do need to kind of notice what kind of altitude you're looking at or living at, because this will definitely directly correlate to the temperatures. So it can be 115 degrees in one place, and it could be 100 degrees or 101 or 2 degrees in a different part of the state. So you really do need to research a little bit and kind of have an awareness. Now, when I moved here, the realtor did tell me there were no snakes and that it never got above 90 degrees. And that was a sales pitch. So do your own research, come out in the different seasons of the year, spend a little time, know what you're getting yourself into. I will say this though, the human body does adapt. That first summer that I was out here, gosh, I could barely walk. It was so hot and I just didn't want to be outside at all. Over the course of time, I've grown to really appreciate the heat and appreciate the sun. And it feels almost like a warm, toasty blanket. And when fall rolls around and the air gets a little crisper, I kind of miss that warm feeling, that blanket feeling. And I think, gosh, it's not so bad after all. I've been here now 8 years, and this is the first summer that I haven't really had days where I just do not like it. I have learned to adapt. My body has adapted. And that's a natural process. You would think it would happen a little bit faster, but it is a little bit of a slower process for your body to finally belong to that region. The good news is it does happen and you can acclimate. The third thing to hate about the desert Southwest is, generally speaking, there are fewer roads and the roads aren't as well maintained. So you may only have one main thoroughfare to go to do all of your shopping. Where I lived before, the town was sort of built on concentric circles. You could take multiple routes to get to the post office or the supermarket or to the mall, wherever you were going, or to work. Here in the desert Southwest, most of the times, there's only one main street or highway going through town. And so if you want to go to the bank, the supermarket, Costco, gas up, maybe run to the post office, you're going to be going up and down that same route. Also, I've noticed that as more and more people have transplanted here, the traffic has picked up. It can be a little bit of a small town gridlock. Now, it's nothing like the big city, but I'll tell you what, it does slow things down quite a bit. I used to be able to go up to town in about 16 minutes. And when I was just a tourist and I was visiting here, now I would have to factor 30 to 45 minutes. So you can see that the traffic does make a difference when there's only one road. And so also for evacuation, if there was a forest fire, you might have to, which has never happened, but if there was a forest fire, you would have only one egress, one way out to safety. So these are things to consider because, you just need to be aware of where you're living, how you will get about, what your daily errands will feel like, and also how it is to get, say, to the airport or other things. Another thing that I didn't really take into consideration is that although we have a hospital and most of the towns do have hospitals, they're considered rural hospitals. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they may not have all the emergency services or other types of services, or the quality of care may not be as high as a city hospital. Now, coming from the Northeast, where hospitals are in abundance by the dozens, and you have many major metropolitan areas within a short distance where you could go to any hospital you wanted, here we don't have choice. We have one regional hospital and the services may be limited. Now, in the really small towns, they may be severely limited. For example, my cousin likes to winter from Colorado in the desert areas, and she fell and shattered her shoulder and needed shoulder replacement. Well, she was very, very fortunate that there was a physician on call who knew the specificity of doing a full shoulder replacement. If she had not, she may have ended up with limited use of that shoulder for the rest of her life, and that would be tragic. So you do have to be aware of this because there are limitations, and also the quality may not quite be up to par to, say, a big city or a big teaching hospital in a metropolitan area. Now, generally speaking, a metropolitan area may be an hour or so away, so it doesn't mean it's impossible, but you do need to know, and you do need to have resources. I did align myself with both the local hospital as well as the largest city hospital in the biggest metropolitan area so that I have a doctor relationship in both places. And I do highly advise that in the event that you ever had an emergency, God forbid. Apart from the hospitals, another thing to consider in terms of healthcare is we can have a shortage of doctors. Sometimes I understand that the pay isn't quite as high in the rural areas, and so it doesn't attract the same number or quality of doctors. We have some great doctors up here, though. I have found great doctors that have really impressed me. But by the same token, you may wait a long time to get an appointment. And sometimes you don't want to wait, or sometimes you can't wait. So it's really important to consider the quality of the medical care, the hospitals, but also that there may be a shortage of specialists in any given area of medicine. And so these are things that can change year to year even. So there's not that same vast array of choices as you would have in a major city. You can work around it for sure, but it's something to be aware of. And depending on the size of the town, it may not be an issue at all. In the really small towns, it may. The next one on the list is that people don't necessarily abide by the traffic laws or the good etiquette of driving. So for example, people don't necessarily realize that the left lane is for passing and for going fast. So people will just plod along in all of the lanes as if they were all equally designated. So that you can't pass, you can't get around someone going slow. People tend to go slower on the roads here than back where I came from. And so that can be super annoying. It can slow you down. Another thing is there tends to be, it seems, a lot of head-on crashes. People aren't either stopping for the red light or running the red light or turning incorrectly or not putting a blinker on. That's a big one. People don't put their blinkers on. And back in the Northeast, we have kind of a sign language. So if someone lets you in, lets you merge in, you kind of wave to them in your rearview mirror and thank them. Or you might put your hand out the window and tell someone to go around. No one does that here. Now, there's none of that kind of hidden language of driving, and there's a lot less courtesy. And you may find a little bit of a cowboy tone if you want to merge in. They may tend to try to race you out or cut you off. So there is a little bit of that. For the most part, as we've had more transplants coming in over time, that has changed. But the courtesy thing is just missing completely. And so you just have to be aware. I do look both ways multiple times. I do go a little bit slower, and I'm ready to have my foot on the brake at any given time. So these are things to consider, especially if you're coming from a region of the country where everyone seems to abide by the driving rules. Another thing to hate about the desert Southwest is that in these smaller areas and rural areas where you're out, sometimes in the middle of nowhere, you may pay more for the price of goods because everything has to be trucked in, and the further away you are from the major hubs, the more cost for gas and transportation is going to come into play, and you may pay an added cost for that. Now, I know this is true of some place, especially like Hawaii, which is not the desert Southwest, but as a contrast, if everything's coming by boat and it takes days or weeks to get there, then you know that you're going to be paying a higher premium for example, food and supplies. So here, that can be true depending on how remote you are and also just other economic factors that might come into play. Take a good long look at the cost of living. There are many websites that can inform you on the cost of living, and you can do cost comparisons. I will put that in the description box where you can find out more and start to do your own research. I highly recommend that because you don't want to find out the hard way what the cost of living actually is after you're a resident. The ninth thing to hate about living in the desert Southwest is that many of the jobs are lower paying jobs. Many of the places are tourist areas or very rural, and so you will find either healthcare jobs or sales jobs, retail jobs, very few office jobs depending on where you are located or where you're choosing to consider. So take a good long look at that if you still plan to work even part-time, because it limits the salary per hour and it limits also the options. So take a good long look at that when you're looking and researching for where you may want to relocate. If you're planning to stay in the workforce, even part-time, it's important to know what you might be earning on an hourly wage or per month, and also the type of work that's available. I, for one, terribly discounted this as something that was going to be a problem, and I've done a video on that. So I will leave a link in the description box below so that you can watch that video as well. The big mistake that I made moving here was that I did not really seriously understand that it's a rural environment with rural jobs. There sometimes are no real true office jobs. There may be a few associations or a few types of businesses that do have true office jobs, or things like that. But for the most part, you're going to find mostly retail and healthcare. And it's very disappointing when you're used to having high-paying office jobs available to you. There may be office jobs, but they're just not going to pay the same salary range. So take a good long look at that. And last but not least, on the 10 things to hate about the desert Southwest, I will review the wildlife here, because even though they're beautiful and I put them in the positive side to love about the desert Southwest, there's also reason to hate these things. So again, that brings up the snakes. We've talked about the snakes and having to be careful and having to hike carefully or move carefully in the summer months particularly. But also we do have large animals. Now out here, they don't call them large game or large animals. They call them critters. To me, a critter might be a chipmunk or a mouse. A critter is not a bobcat. A critter is not a javelina. So the lingo is even different on how they relate to them. But there are big game and big animals. And a lot of time people that have cameras, like a Nest doorbell or something like that, will highlight this on Nextdoor that a bobcat walked up to their front door in the middle of the night. And so you have to be a little bit careful with your pets, because you don't want to leave them out overnight for sure. You don't want to leave them out too long sometimes. Now, I've never had a problem because I have a bigger dog, but for the most part, cats seem to disappear all the time. And that could even be something like an owl or a hawk. They can airlift that small pet right out of your backyard, especially if it's a teacup dog or a very small dog. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's something to be aware of and something to just be more vigilant about. Maybe sit outside with them when they're outside, or have something covered where they can be outside and still be protected. So these are things to consider. We don't have deer as much, which is really interesting. So back in the Northeast, if you hit an animal while driving, it might be a deer. If you go way, way up in the mountains, there might be elk. But for the most part, if there's roadkill, for example, it might be a fox or a coyote. You don't see deer or big game being hit on the roads, which is interesting. It's an interesting observation. If you're taking a winding road through a mountain, by all means, drive with some caution that something could run into the road, and it could be something big like an elk. But for the most part, they don't interfere with the driving. So that summarizes the 10 things to love and the 10 things to hate about living in this desert Southwest. There's wonderful things and there's things that are a little bit less wonderful. It's really just you kind of weighing out for yourself where that fits in your list. You may find that you have more positives and less negatives, or the reverse, more negatives and more positives. And actually, over the course of time, we all adjust. And that's the big takeaway. You will adjust to the different things, the different life. And even though at the onset you may hate it, you may grow to actually appreciate it and love it in the years ahead. So many happy adventures to all of you in your relocation and in your adjustments as you move through retirement. Thank you for joining. It's always a pleasure to share with you. And I love having you as part of the community. Please do like or subscribe down below if you haven't already. And please do look at the corresponding links to videos in the description section. And I would just love to hear in the comments where you've moved and what has struck you as something to love or hate. If you want to drop in there and leave a comment on the one thing you hate and the one thing you love about where you've moved to, and share it with the rest of us. We may get a giggle, or we may have a, whoo, that's scary kind of moment, but it's really interesting to see how we adapt and learn through our retirement. Have a great day, and thanks for joining.